This will be the third lesson in our series of what is the Bible, how to study the Bible, how's the best way to start. If somebody asks you, how do I study the Bible? What's the best place to start? With many of us, we were raised in the church, and we don't think about that so much. But if you were not raised in the church, that would be a question that you would want to ask and that you would want answered is, how's the best way to study the Bible? What book do I start in? And some of those questions are what I hope to answer in this series that we're in now that has to do with what is the Bible. And tonight, I'd like to look at a question. Is the Old Testament for New Testament Christians? When I grew up in the church, I go into Sunday school and listening to Sunday morning services and listening to the preacher and so on, most of the time the messages were from the New Testament. And that's understandable because we're the New Testament church and we're at a time after Jesus was on the earth, after he lived here. He was born here, he lived here, he died here, and he resurrected and came back and ascended up into heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father, where he remains to this day. So it would be natural that the New Testament church would study mostly from the New Testament. But the question is the Old Testament for the New Testament church? And I'm going to start at this from a kind of roundabout way. I've got here the Septuagint, which was written, you might be thinking, what does this have to do with anything? But stick with me. The Septuagint, which was written about the 3rd century. I have question marks behind these because that's not exact, and we don't have exacts. But anyway, the Septuagint, 3rd century BC. The Dead Sea Scrolls up into the 1st century and before. The Latin Vulgate, which is 4th century AD. And the Masoretic text, which was the 10th century AD. Up until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest Hebrew writings that we had of the Old Testament were the Masoretic text. And you can see that was about the 10th century. So with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that backed us up quite many centuries so that we could see that we have proof or evidence of the Hebrew writings. The Septuagint was written in Greek. And like I said, with the Vulgate, it was written in Latin. So up until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the early mid-20th century, the oldest text that we had in Hebrew were the Masoretic texts of the 10th century, up into the 10th century. The New Testament writers included approximately 250 expressed Old Testament quotations. So the New Testament writers quoted 250 times, expressly quoted from the Old Testament. And if one includes indirect and partial quotations, the number jumps to more than 1,000, referring to all Old Testament books except for Obadiah. That doesn't mean we need to leave out Obadiah. That just means they didn't quote Obadiah. It is to be noted that the whole New Testament contains not even one explicit citation of any of the Old Testament Apocrypha. And this creates some dissension within the New Testament church, especially when it's concerning the Catholics and the Protestants when it comes to the Apocrypha. And some say there is some quotes and there's some things that they can point to, but there's no exact quotes that I have found. And if you find different, I'd be willing to listen. What is the Apocrypha? Apocrypha is the ancient Greek, which means the hidden things, are the biblical books received by the early church as part of the Greek version of the Old Testament. Notice it's of the Greek version. That doesn't mean that they're not legitimate. It just means that it was in the Greek, but not included in the Hebrew Bible. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, it does not include the Apocrypha in most cases, being excluded by non-Hellenistic Jews from their canon. So when canon means basically a measuring rod or a way to measure, a way to determine what should go in the scriptures, what should not, what should be included as scriptures, and so on. How was it determined which books would be included in the Bible? Now, tonight we're talking about the Old Testament and whether the Old Testament is for the New Testament church. So we'll try to stay along that particular line. There is no scholarly consensus as to when the Hebrew Bible canon was fixed. In other words, when was it established? We don't know for sure. Some scholars argue that it was fixed by the Hasmonean dynasty, or the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, which was 140 to 40 BC, while others argue it was not fixed until the 2nd century AD or even later. Is that important? Does that matter? Josephus was a 1st century Jewish historian who was also a Roman citizen from about 33 AD to 100 AD. And he refers to the sacred scriptures divided into 3 parts. The 5 books of the Torah, which we would call the Pentateuch, 13 books of the prophets, and 4 other books of hymns and wisdom, so that we know at least by the 1st century they had some established structure as to what the Jewish people included as part of the Hebrew Bible. At least by the 1st century, there was agreement as to which books would be included. The Hebrew Bible is divided into 3 portions: the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The prophets in history: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. 12 minor, i.e. smaller, prophets, in Hebrew often considered one book. In the synagogue, all 12 were often written on one scroll: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were included in these. And the writings, which is Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So how does this tie in with us and how we study the Bible today? Does that help us in our study? What can we learn from these, and how can this help us to understand who Jesus is? The genealogies. All of us like genealogies. You get in the Bible, when you get to the chapters like in Genesis in the 5th chapter and 11th chapter, has genealogy, who begat whom, and so on down the line, how long they lived. And I know your eyes glaze over when you get to that point. That's not something we particularly enjoy reading, but it's interesting to read, and it's helpful, and there's a reason why it's there. In Genesis 5, you have Adam, Seth, right on down to Noah. Genesis 11, from Noah, right on down to Abram, who became Abraham. Why is that important? Why are these genealogies important to us? Or are they important to us? Does it matter? Does it have anything to do with us and who Jesus was? The 5th chapter and the 11th chapter of Genesis takes us from Adam to Noah and from Noah to Abraham. So if you'll notice, it ties you back to Adam, who is the one that God made the covenant with originally. He told them to have dominion and take authority over everything that was here. And it ties him into Abraham. Then starting in the 12th chapter, and the rest of Genesis has to do with Abraham and his descendants. If starting in the 12th chapter of the book of Genesis, there's a shift from talking about the covenant God made with man to the covenant God made with Abram, or Abraham, the first Jew, why should we care? Why should we care who the Jews are? Why should we care about what the Jews study? Why should we care about the book of Genesis? Why should that matter to us? Genesis 5:1, these are the family records of the descendants of Adam. Okay, so this is the descendants of Adam. If we're the descendants of Adam, this might have something to do with us. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. Notice he created male and female. When they were created, he blessed them and called them man. I have a asterisk here, and the reason I do is because in the King James it says Adam, and here it translated it as man, which is a valid translation either way, but this creation included man and woman. Adam was 130 years old when he fathered a son in his likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. And if you remember, you had Cain and Abel that came before Seth, but our lineage is followed through Seth because Cain killed Abel, and then Cain was ostracized, and his lineage began to vanish away. Adam lived 800 years after the birth of Seth, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So Adam's life lasted 930 years, then he died. Now, if he lived 800 years and birthed sons and daughters, how many sons and daughters did he birth? We don't know, but he was the first man and first woman, and we don't know how long that they continued to produce. Have no idea. Man, Hebrew, and I mentioned this with the notation from before, and when you see the word Adam, it means ruddy, a human being, an individual, or the species, mankind. In other words, it can be more than just man. So when it refers to Adam, when you're talking in Genesis, many times it talks about man and woman because it's referring to mankind. Who was made in the likeness of God, Adam or Eve? This is important because when you realize that God, and many times when I ask this question, who was made in the likeness of God, Adam or Eve, I say yes. They were both made in the image of God. They were both made to be in the image of God and to be the ones that subdued and took dominion here on this earth. Why did God create man and all the animals? But with Eve, he took a rib from Adam to make her. It says man was formed out of the dirt, and breath of life was breathed into him. Why did he not do the same with Eve? Why didn't he take some more dirt? Why didn't he form that together? Why didn't he breathe the breath of life into her and made her separate? Genesis 1:26 says, then God said, let us make man in our image. So it said, let's make man in our image. Doesn't tell us who the our is, and many people have opinions, but it says, let's make man in our image according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. So it said he created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. So the creation of man was one, and they were both created in the image of God. Then when you get into the second chapter of the book of Genesis, it gets more specific as to how God created man, and it centers more on man and his place in creation. And the 23rd verse here, it says, and the man said, this one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one is called woman, for she was taken from man. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. The closest relationship of any two beings on the face of this earth, according to Scripture, is husband and wife. They're the only ones that's spoken of as one flesh. They become one flesh. And man and woman were one flesh. So how would that come about? If God had made Eve out of the dust of the earth, she would not have been one with Adam, and any covenant made with Adam would not apply to her. So you see, if God had created Adam, and then later on created Eve in the same way, and he made a covenant with Adam or he made a covenant with Eve, it would not cover the other one because they were different beings and different creatures. Note, he did not make a covenant with the hogs, the chickens, the rhinoceros, or elephants. If you're wondering what the plural of rhinoceros is, it's rhinoceros. It's the same either way. But God made man and he made woman, and he made them specifically with a specific way for a particular purpose. Before we go any further, how do we study and understand the Bible? How do we do that? And that's the thought question, one to provoke thought in all of us. First, we have to decide what the Bible is and if we can trust it. Since we so far have been talking about the Old Testament, how can we be confident in what it is teaching? Is the Bible true or just some fanciful storytelling? Which is it? First, we have a great cloud of witnesses. In other words, we have many ancient manuscripts that attest to it. We have much in science that could attest to it. For instance, do we have ancient evidence of its acceptance with more than one source? The answer is yes. We have the Septuagint, which is what LXX stands for. We have the Septuagint, which is about 3rd century BC. About 200 and some years before Christ is when we have the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls around the 1st century. We had the Vulgate around the 4th century AD. We had the Masoretic text around the 10th century. And all of these are in agreement. Are they exactly the same? Are there some words that are slightly different? Yes. But overall, the books are the same, the writings are the same, and it's been the same and consistent for centuries, at least as far back as the 4th century. 3rd century AD. Let's try that again. The 3rd century BC, as far back as the 3rd century BC, which was the Septuagint. So it's been a long time. Does it witness to our spirit is another question. Are there truths from the beginning moving forward that we can verify? Are the truths universal? Now, what do I mean by that? Are there truths in the Bible that can apply to anybody at any time in any place in history? For instance, we look at the 10 Commandments. We're not to kill, do murder. Has that ever changed? Is that the truth in all societies? It tells us not to steal. Is that a truth in all societies? Another example that you might, if saying whether there's universal truths that are true for everyone, there's never been a civilization where you rewarded a person from running, who ran from battle. You always award the ones that are heroic in battle, not the ones that run from battle. So there are universal truths in this world, and some apply to everyone, and that's the truth of the writings in the Bible. Verifiable truths. Here's one thing. Everything produces after its kind. Many times in talking about evolution, they say, what predictions did the theory of evolution make that have come true and we found to be true since then? Well, if you want the oldest of these, you have to look back to the Bible. And what it says, so God created the large sea creatures and every living creature that moves and swarms in the water according to their kinds. He also created every winged bird according to its kind. Go down to the 24th verse. Then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that crawl, and the wildlife of the earth according to their kinds, and so on. So God made the wildlife of the earth according to their kinds. Do you notice a theme here? The livestock according to their kinds, and creatures that crawl on the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. It's evident, and I've got it written down here, that cats do not mate with chickens or horses with cows and so on. They always produce after their kind. We don't have any record of a cat becoming a dog or a dog becoming a chicken or a giraffe becoming an ostrich. We just don't have any evidence of that at all anywhere that we can find. So it's a prediction that was made from centuries and centuries ago that it would produce, each animal would produce after their kind. The earth and the universe had a beginning. Genesis 1:1 said, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 3 says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. If you notice in the beginning it says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And it said, God said, let there be light, and there was light. But it was the 4th day before he created the sun and the moon. So food for thought is what lit up everything until then. There are some in science that posit that the universe is self-existent and had no beginning. There are some. By and large, there is more evidence that it had a beginning, And I would say that many, if not most, agree. Most scientists agree with that, and I won't go into all the evidences for that. Maybe we will at some time, but it's not pertinent to this particular study. But it's one thing that we can see that Earth, from what we can see and most scientific observation shows us, is that the Earth had a beginning. And it says, in the beginning. Man is unique, and no animal comes close, and man has the power to take authority over the other animals. Many times when I hear people talking, they say it's amazing how much we are like, and it'll name an animal like chimpanzee, how much they're like us, and how much we have in common to each other. But what's the most amazing thing to me is the fact that there's nothing that comes close to what man is. Man is hands down very much higher than any other creature. No way there's no comparison there. Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the livestock, all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." And we can see that all through history, man has domesticated animals and has taken authority over animals. And many times we've been destructive to nature, to God's creation in ways that we shouldn't have been. But we have the power to do so, and we have the power to change that. We have the power to affect things negatively and positively, more so than any other creature on the face of the earth. We have no evidence that animals of any kind, even the highest forms of life on earth besides man, that even reason and even think about these issues. But it says that we would have authority over all these different things. There is much evidence to support the truth that the Scriptures have stood the test of time, and it is well documented that the Scriptures that we have today are reliable. There is ample scientific evidence that support assertions made in Scripture concerning how we got here. There was an in the beginning. There is ample evidence for the eternal God, the Creator, on a spiritual and a physical level. So do we have evidence that the Bible is true? Yes. Do we have the original Scriptures that were written? No. Most of that has decayed long ago. But we have much ample evidence to prove there's no other writing that has any more support in authority than what the Bible does. We have thousands upon thousands of manuscripts that attest to what the Bible teaches, more so than any other teaching, any other writing that exists in man. And this ends our third lesson in this series.